All right, welcome to Sass Bites. This is episode 62. This is your weekly bite of Sass during your lunch break. I'm Mike Godbolt. You can follow us down there at Mike Godbolt at Sass Bites to catch up with all the Twitter action. We've been going through this last several weeks building this project up, which kind of started as a website. It's now turned into more of like a style guide theme kind of thing. But we're going through kind of looking at best practices, looking at the tools that go together to create this as we're kind of architecting this together. Today is no different. And today we're going to start probably what's going to be a 2 or 3 week series on visual regression testing. It's a big, long word, but it basically means that we need to test our stuff. If you do a lot of PHP or JavaScript or work a lot of backend, you know that test-driven development, writing tests to make sure your features continue to work and don't break, that's really good stuff. And for us to be able to do that on the front end as well, we need a slightly different tool. We need to be able to test not the code, but we need to actually responds and looks in the browser. And that's where visual regression testing comes in, where we can take what this component or what this layout is supposed to look like, and then compare it to what it currently looks like and make sure that that's the same. And we've got some really good tools to do that, where we can actually just compare images and find those differences. And my apologies if you hear a crying baby. It's one of those days at home. Anyway, so we're going to dive into that today and look at how we've got our regression testing set up in our project, and kind of give you the quick rundown of how it works. And we're going to dive into the deep end of it next week as we kind of start looking at the tests and how those tests are written. So I'm going to go ahead and share my other screen, which is this one here. All right, awesome. So as we do each week, we're going to go and pull the most recent version of the Sass Bites demo. And make sure I'm in sight. I am. Good. Get clone. And I believe I made sure to pull everything out. I'm good to go. And we're going to go in here and, like always, we're going to do an npm install. So basically what I'm showing here is we're making sure this project is set up in a way that all of the tools, all of the pieces are part of this build system. So you could go pull this down, hit npm install, be the exact same spot I'm at with all the tools necessary for it. There are a couple caveats that are on there. You're going to need Node installed. You probably want Bower installed. I think I don't have that. I think you need that globally right now. You also need Bundler for gems because we do have some gems running. But with those three, which is basically your different package managers, you should be able to do an npm install, have all the pieces that you need along with this repo to be able to run all of these different commands, to pull up all these pages, run all these tests, and basically do all this yourself as well. So what it's going to do right now, it's going out and getting like PhantomCSS, and it's going and pulling in our Bower packages and pulling in EQJS, which I talked about last week. It's getting Grunt and all of the Grunt pieces and just all those things that it needs to be able to do its job. You're only going to do this once when you set the project up. So if it takes a couple minutes, the build processes can take a few minutes in some more complex projects if my fans start kicking up in a high gear. So so that's everything it pulled in. It pulled in like PhantomCSS you see there with all of its dependencies. And so all the pieces should be ready to go. So now when I type Grunt, it's going to go through, it's going to run all of its Grunt processes, it's going to compile Sass, compile our style guide, and it's going to spin up a server and open that page up for us so we get back to where we are here with all of our components. And so we've been looking at this for a while. This is what we've had built. I haven't really changed much. I have updated a couple things on the build processes, so go ahead and pull down the most recent if you have an older version. But you can see we've got our media gallery layouts and our card layouts. And so these are the pieces that we're going to be testing. So one thing to note is the reason that we're doing this kind of in this order is when we do visual testing, what we need to do is we need to make sure that the thing that we're testing isn't changing. And that's really tough when you have a website, especially a dynamic website that's pulling in the most recent blog articles, that has a Twitter widget on it, and it has stuff that updates and changes. What you really need to do is, since it's visual testing, you need to make sure you have consistent content. You need to make sure that you have content that's going to be the same every single time you ping it. So you don't have a homepage that has, whatever the most recent blog, which is changing all the time. It's tough to test that visually because that continues to change. So what we want to do is we want to test these component and layout concepts to make sure that they don't change. Then when you implement them, obviously the implementation is going to continue to change. But as long as this code is stable and solid and the JavaScript works and the styles work, you know the implementation is going to be solid as well, or at least that's the idea behind it. So this is what we're going to test. We're going to make sure that this card here looks like this, that this gutter between each component is always the same, that the gutter around the component is always the same, that the title up here is always styled properly. And that's what we want to test. We don't really care what goes inside of it, because that stuff can change. We want to make sure that the stuff that has to do with the card is always the same. Or if we go over to component, like our blog teaser, we want to make sure that, you know, at this width, that the layout is this, that the title's like this, that when you hover over it, it has an underline. Actually, I don't know if I'm testing for that, but I should. That, you know, the text color, the text font size, the spacing, all that. We want to make sure all that's consistent. And of course, it's a lot easier when we have the style guide. It's always static every time we spin it up. So let's go ahead and let's see what testing looks like. Our test actually, I've got our test built right now, so we'll actually compile a style guide and then test, so we don't need to have things running. Sometimes you might want to keep it running and have tests separate. You can build your project differently just on how you want to do it. But I've got a test task set up that's automatically going to compile my style guide. It's going to spin up that server, and it's going to start running the tests. And since this is the first time we've ran tests, we don't have any baselines. And this is kind of first thing I want to talk about with how we're testing things. There's two ways you can test things. You can test what you're looking at now, like this component style guide, versus this style guide somewhere else. So like comparing point A to point B. So say if you have like if you have a production server, or if you have some kind of like gold master, this is what it should be. And then we're doing dev work over on this side. I'm doing hand motions in the moment, where you compare site A to site B and make sure they're the same. You can totally do that if you want to with different frameworks. We're using PhantomCSS, which uses the concept of baselines. So what it does is it says, okay, I've got this blog teaser. I'm going to compare it to something. And what I can compare it to is an image that I already have stored. So we don't have those initial baselines, as they're called. So we're going to first create those baselines. So we're going to run grunt test. And that's going to run through and build a complete, fresh, brand new build of our style guide, because we want to make sure it's clean and up to date. And it's going to go and run through and create snapshots of all the items in it. You'll see some capture failed messages here. It's a false positive for some reason. I don't know why those errors are coming in. I need to track them down. They aren't affecting what we're doing, though. So you see that there's a bunch of these screenshots are generated, and this message I need to actually fix because that's not working the right right location either. But I can tell you that where they're going is the right place. All right. So what they're doing is inside of our Sass. One of the things I've done specifically with this, I'm actually running a custom version of Grunt PhantomCSS that has a slightly alternate runner on it. And one of the main things that I've done is I've changed the location of where the images get stored. This is really important to me. I've got all my components as folders inside my Sass structure. And I've got tests right here, and we'll run over how these tests work and how you write them and everything. I want those baselines to be there as well, because when I check this code in, I want this these images to actually be with the rest of the component. So go here to my card, and you can see this is the snapshot. It's a PNG snapshot, so no compression or anything. Ping snapshot of just that component on the page. This is great because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what else is on the page, the position of this on the page, or anything. It goes and grabs just exactly what that selector asks us to grab. And we'll get into that next week when we talk about the tests. But as you can see, it just grabs that. We go in our components, and we've got our blog teaser. And again, we have our test here. And we've got also with this, where it just grabs that selector. It grabs that blog teaser selector. And we've got it at the mobile breakpoint as well as the desktop breakpoint. So we can test these multiple sizes. We can test as many as you want. It really comes down to test coverage. This thing only has 2 different layouts. Okay, I'm only going to test it in 2 different places, but it might have 3 or 4. Or it might, there might be different spots that you want to test to make sure things work at certain points, or something changes at a certain breakpoint. So it's good to test. So you can see we have both of those. So we make sure that the layout switches as well as just the styles being appropriate as to they are. and then our cat comes in there. And actually, this cat's probably a bad idea to have in here because it is being pulled from a third-party service. You probably want to have a static image that's in there and never changes. Otherwise, if that third-party service changes the image, it'll probably break. But anyway, so each of these it's gone through each of these tests and created the image for them. So those are our baselines. So what happens is if we run this test again, it's now going to go back through. It's going to see that we have baselines, and it's going to take a snapshot and now compare those snapshots to our baselines. And you can see all tests passed for our blog teaser mobile, our popular video passed, our quote mobile passed, our card passed. This is another thing that the alternate runner I built is using, is it's doing each of those test files separately and reporting back to it because each of those test files has tests for a specific component. So it's going through each one and saying, okay, that passed, okay, that passed, okay, that passed. Otherwise, it just runs everything and then brings back a pass or fail at the end. So all of our tests have passed. It means that the images we took 5 minutes ago and the images we just took now are exactly the same, which means if we want it not to be the case, say we want to do this, hopefully this will work. Yeah, let's go 4. Go 4 and 8. So our blog teaser. Say we ended up changing the size of the spans of the blog teaser. Let's go ahead and run our test again. Now it's going to go through again. It's going to compile that Sass. So the changes I made there will get put into the new style guide that spins up in the background. Yep, there we go, the first one. So it hits, and it's scrolling by, but you see visual found change on blog teaser desktop. And there's a big mismatch, 42% mismatch. But it's also running everything else. It's finding those things have passed, which is great. So another advantage of it putting all of the images in the folder right next to the test is it's really easy to find this diff. So here's the mobile, and here is the diff. It's exactly the same. Here's the desktop, and then here is this is the baseline, and diff is the new one it just took. So you can see there's a big difference between those two images. And if you look at this fail image, you'll actually see a visual representation of what's changed. In this case, lots of stuff has moved everywhere. But there was just one thing that changed in a larger image. It would be able to point that out a whole lot easier. So we have a failure. And what that means is that we have two options. We can either say, this is actually not a failure. This is expected change. And in that case, what we do is we delete the old baseline and create a new baseline. Or we would just go in and fix whatever we broke. Because obviously I fixed this intentionally, but it might be that I changed a variable somewhere and didn't realize that the variable actually broke this element here. So so that's kind of our workflow is everything should pass, and we shouldn't have any any different images. Or if we are working, say I'm specifically trying to change this blog teaser, I would go in here, I'd delete the baselines. I can just do the whole folder because they're all just generated. I'd run my test again. And actually, this is a good time to show this off. I actually can also do this. I can do target of blog teaser. So -- target, target. Got that before I did it. Target equals blog teaser. And Grunt's going to specifically just run that one file rather than running the entire suite. Because that's really all I want to do right now is just run, create new baselines for this with that changed size. So now you see when we come back here, we've got our desktop, or sorry, mobile, which hasn't changed, and there's our bigger desktop with larger image. So if that was our story, if we were asked to go into our blog teaser and make it a 4:8 layout instead of a 3:9 layout, we'd be all right, we make those changes, and we also update our baseline. So then when if we're doing feature branches and we do our merge request is going to have the change to the layout Sass partials, as well as new baseline images that are going to show that. So it's a really great way when those images come along with it, you've got this change to the folder that has images and new layout, and all of that come together as a merge request, which also means that if I wasn't supposed to change this, but here are these new images coming in the blog teaser, it's a pretty obvious red flag that, hey, the blog teaser changed. Why did you just commit the new baselines? We're not expecting you to change this. You're supposed to be working on some other feature, but you're updating the blog teaser baselines. So it's a really great way to make sure when people are committing code, the only way for this to pass is for all those images to be right. And that gives you a really powerful place to know that I can make changes. I can make big site-wide global changes or make large changes to a component and be really confident that I can now run my grunt test. And it's going to go and check all of those baselines to all of the components and the layouts and whatever I want to test inside of my style guide to make sure all of that passes. So the idea would be either to make sure you do this manually, or maybe put this in part of your build process, or your you have a Git hook that grabs this and runs the tests or something. I mean, you can go crazy with the automation of this, but this gives you a way to say, this is what my blog teaser is supposed to look like. Because now if you look at this, if you go get status, you can see that there's change to the blog teaser, and that I haven't committed anything in here yet. So there's also obviously changes to the images, inside of the blog teaser. So anyway, that's what we're building. Is we've got this testing system that allows us to check baseline images versus what our style guide currently is. And then what we would eventually do is commit, and maybe I should do that soon so we actually have images in here as baselines. You would either commit these images into your Git repo, or if you're kind of hesitant about committing binary files, these images, into your Git repo, because they will possibly change over time, there are some tools out there where you can actually push these images off to like an S3 account, and then you're actually just storing in Git references to those images. So either store the images or references to the images in the Git repo. So the only way that you can get a passing test in is to actually have those new baselines if you change something. So next week, we're going to dive back in here. We're going to look at Casper.js and how we're using Casper.js to basically interact with, because one thing I did not test is the fact that this is supposed to have an underline on hover. So when I hover over that teaser should have an underline underneath it, and I don't have a way to effectively test that right now. It's actually a perfect segue. We'll do that next week to actually have a test where we're also testing, make sure when you hover over this, what happens to the link. And that's really great because some of these some regressions that come in your system often happen on things that aren't like obviously visible, and that you have to interact with the page to make that happen. So we'll do that next week. We'll dive back into this and do some more regression testing. But please download this, check it out, give it a run. You can take a look at this Grunt PhantomCSS Git repo for the alt runner. If you're using this project, it's automatically going to pull it in. But feel free to use that. I'm currently using that in production, and it's running great. And I'm hoping to eventually merge it in or push it back upstream to the repo that it came from. But I'd love some feedback on it if you have thoughts on that as well. So anyway, got a little over. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next week as we dive more into PhantomCSS. And as always, stay sassy. See you later.